How the Jewish claim to Palestine is historically and religiously false. This is chapter 9, the final chapter. The trial and attempted crucifixion, the name of the man who was crucified instead of the Messiah Isa, the cult of Christianity worships the false Messiah, the War Scroll, Temple Scroll, and New Jerusalem Scroll fulfilled. Prophecy fulfilled. Now we turn to the trial and the attempted crucifixion of the Messiah Isa and how he was saved by his disciples, the rabbis and doctors of law. I will also give the actual name of the man who was crucified in his place. The year was 7, right before Passover, when the Messiah Isa was captured. Judas the Galilean was instrumental in leading the soldiers to his location. The Messiah was seized and taken to the palace of the high priest, where an important member of the Sanhedrin, Ananus, who was waiting for him, interrogated him. The Messiah was asked about his disciples and doctrine. He was then bound and taken to the high priest, and was then led to the hall of judgment. It was early. The chief priests did not enter the hall of judgment because they still had not eaten their Passover meal. The procurator Coponius was called in after that as a witness to the interrogation, urging the chief priests to judge the Messiah according to their own laws. There were several false witnesses who gave contradictory statements, one of whom was the revolutionary Absalom. The priests responded to Coponius that it is not lawful for us to put any man to death. Since the procurator was Coponius, we know the statement was true. He was in charge and was given full powers by Rome, including the power to execute. He asked the Messiah, "Do you know that I have the power to crucify you and have the power to release you?" Anyone being accused of sedition or arousing the populace to rebel, of threatening the destruction of the temple, or of wanting to be crowned king of the Jews would have been handed over to Coponius for judgment and execution. His role was to maintain law and order at any cost after a bloody 10-year civil war during the rule of Archelaus. Coponius did not need to present the case to Rome, nor was he required to abide by the religious laws. He was permitted to use his own discretion. Who was the wicked high priest referred to in the scrolls? Well, his name was Joazar ben Boethus. I'm the first one in history to tell you this. He had a long history during the Herodian era. When Herod the Great became king under Roman authority, he ended the custom of choosing someone from the Hasmonean line to fill the position of high priest. He usually chose candidates from ordinary priestly families. Herod would appoint high priests to suit his own agenda. The motives for his choices were directed by political expediency, and once he was done with them, he would choose a replacement. Joazar's father, Simon ben Boethus, was appointed as high priest to facilitate Herod's marriage to Simon's daughter Miriam about 25 BC. Simon was a well-known Jewish priest from Alexandria, and he had 3 sons that we know of, Simon, Joazar, and Eleazar. Simon and his family lived in Jerusalem. The Boethus family was known throughout Jerusalem as a wealthy family whose sons would hold several positions in the ruling priesthood. Having a high priest in the family was quite convenient for Herod. Not only was this high priest a father-in-law of King Herod, but he would also become the grandfather of the future Herod Philip, the first husband of Herodias, the notorious granddaughter of Herod. Simon's daughter Miriam was so beautiful that Herod wanted her for his wife. In order to marry her, he felt he had to raise the status of the Boethus family, so it would not be beneath the dignity of a king to marry the daughter of a man who was not of high status. Herod therefore decided to depose the high priest Yeshua, son of Phabit, and replace him with Simon. Simon therefore obtained his high priesthood not so much because of his religious renown, but as a political move. His daughter gained a royal position, and he earned the highest priestly title in Jerusalem. In later years, in a fit of anger during one of the many intrigues that regularly occurred in Herod's household, Herod accused Simon's daughter Miriam of having known of a plot and having hidden it from her husband. As a result, he divorced her and temporarily removed their son Philip as heir to the throne. He also removed her father Simon from his position as high priest, replacing him with Matthias, son of Theophilus. Matthias remained in power until an incident in 4 BC involving 2 rabbis, Judas and Matthias, who climbed up the temple gates and removed the golden eagle, symbol of Rome. Before passing judgment on the 2 rabbis, Herod removed Matthias as high priest and replaced him with his ex-brother-in-law Joazar, son of Simon. Herod's choice of Joazar as high priest must have been a deliberate move to make sure he would support him in passing judgment against the rabbis and their disciples. Herod was able to immediately order the execution of the religious doctors of law by burning them alive. To a superstitious populace, it was a bad omen. The same night, they witnessed the eclipse of the moon. Soon after, Herod became very sick, causing him to suffer severe pain before dying. Herod's son Archelaus, who was the intended heir to the throne, wanted to pacify the populace, who were so grieved over the incident their cries of lamentation were heard all over Jerusalem. They demanded vengeance against those close to Herod who had permitted such an atrocity to occur. Their target was Joazar, the high priest. They believed that a high priest should be a man of greater knowledge of religious law and should be superior in morality than one who permitted Herod to so savagely execute 2 beloved rabbis and their students for the simple act of loving God above all else. Archelaus gave the impression that he would consider it, but Joazar remained in power during the entire period of anarchy and bloodshed, which defined most of Archelaus's reign. However, when Archelaus was given the title of ethnarch instead of king, near the end of his rule, he decided to remove Joazar as high priest, and he gave it to his brother Eleazar. No reason is given by Flavius Josephus, something very highly unusual. We are told nothing about Eleazar since the text was tampered with. The information is in the cut and snip section of the history of the period written by Flavius Josephus at the end of volume 17 of Jewish Antiquities and early part of volume 18. The Byzantine Church was obviously busy hiding information that what really happened at the end of Archelaus's rule. Eleazar did not remain long as high priest and was replaced by an unknown priest named Jesus, the son of C. Rabbinic literature tells us more about the Boethus family of Joazar. The Boethus family was described as a sect who in one instance were referred to as Pharisees but were more often equated with the Sadducees. The family amassed a great deal of wealth and power, as did many of the ruling Sadducees. They were the ones the Messiah in the Gospels was criticizing because they entered the temple with their finest garments, choosing the best seats and enjoying the admiration of people who were taken in by their wealth. The Boethusians, like the Sadducees, did not believe in the resurrection of the dead. They also did not accept the oral law, at least if it could not be backed by the written law. On many an occasion, the Boethusians and the sages disagreed on temple ritual. The general populace took the side of the sages and even reacted to what they regarded as the ignorance of the Boethusian priests on certain temple practices. In one recorded instance, a Boethusian priest was making a mockery of the sages by doing the opposite of what the latter claimed was accurate ritual. This drew a reaction from the people within the temple, who proceeded to throw fruits at the Boethusian priest. In 2 judicial cases, the sages won their arguments against those of the Boethusians. These involved disagreements over the calendar dates, usually pertaining to decisions regarding festival dates. There were several instances of such disagreements. Such disagreements are mentioned in the scrolls. In hymn 12 of the Thanksgiving hymns of the scrolls, the teacher of righteousness criticized the teachers of lies who withhold knowledge from God's people and criticized their folly concerning their feast days. From that description, it should be clear that the wicked high priest who wanted to eliminate the Messiah Isa was none other than Joazar. The Boethus family, like the Ananus family that monopolized the high priesthood for 35 years, was not popular with the people. In fact, it was Ananus, who was one of the other priests who witnessed the trial of the Messiah. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Messiah entered the temple and cast out all them that sold and bought in the temple and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seat of them that sold doves, and said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Without an explanation, it seems the high priest, last chosen by Archelaus, Jesus son of C, was removed from power, and Joazar once again became high priest. This must have happened once Archelaus was banished to Vienna. Coponius was sent as procurator between 6 to 9 CE, and Quirinius was sent to Syria and then Judea to perform a census of properties. At first the Jews were shocked that they had to register their properties, but they gave in to the arguments of the high priest Joazar, who told them not to oppose the Roman decision to tax them according to the value of their properties. Judas the Galilean and his companion Zadok, a Pharisee, organized a rebellion. Zadok may have been one of the sons of Zadok mentioned in the scrolls. Well, Judas persuaded the masses not to register their properties. Their rebellion succeeded. The scrolls describe Joazar, without naming him, as having a reputation for reliability at the beginning of his term of service. But when he became ruler over Israel, he became proud and forsook God and betrayed the commandments for the sake of riches. He amassed by force the riches of the lawless, who rebelled against God, seizing the riches of the peoples, thus adding to the guilt of his crimes, and he committed abhorrent deeds in every defiling impurity. Now that we have the cast of characters, we can continue with the trial. The Messiah was in the hall of judgment, and after midnight, the temple gates were opened, and a group of Samaritans, who had obviously heard that there was someone in the temple who claimed to be the Messiah, entered the temple grounds, and in an act of mockery, scattered human bones throughout. Jews believed that anyone coming into contact with human bones was defiled, because they would be considered impure. They also believed that the final messenger, known as the scepter, would be a Messiah, and when he comes, God would raise the bones of the dead during the resurrection of souls. Clearly, the Samaritans did not believe this was their Ephraimitic Messiah. Before the Passover rituals, a high priest would begin purifying a special robe that he wore during the festivals. The purification rituals took 7 days. Once exposed to human bones in the temple, the entire complex would have been defiled, including the high priest, his robe, and all the Nazarites coming to the temple who had taken their vows, since they would become unholy like the priests. A high priest who carefully prepared and purified himself for the Passover sacrifices would have been defiled and would not have been able to perform the sacrifices. To purify himself again, he would have had to perform the required washing and ablution, would have had to dress himself in a robe of white linen, and he would have had to make the appropriate sacrifices. The rituals of purification would have taken 7 days. The priests in the temple and the people who traveled large distances for Passover would have been furious, angry enough to demand justice. Because of the scattering of the bones, everyone who came to the temple was removed from the grounds until the area could be purified. The gates were closed again, and it was a very unusual act. Any judgment or execution planned in the chamber of hewn stones would have been out of the question under such circumstances. Any court hearing for a prominent religious figure, usually held at the entry of the Temple Mount or at the entry of the temple, would have been impossible. The grounds were defiled. An inscription found in Palestine, written in Greek and dated to this period, announced that anyone who moved the bones of the dead to a different location than the place they were buried would be punished with death. It was during this event that the Samaritans offered 2 rats for sacrifice instead of the traditional pigeons, and the incident is said to have occurred around 7 of the Common Era. Joazar must have been furious, but seeing an opportunity where the crowd was angry about what had happened, he incited them to demand the crucifixion of the Messiah. Instead of crucifying Barabbas, who was accused of murder during the insurrection, they demanded that Barabbas be released and the Messiah be crucified. The people, who did not know him, most likely thought he was an impostor, and that is the impression we get during the crucifixion scene. According to the Gospels, the procurator Coponius asked the Sanhedrin priests 3 times to alter their decision. It seems during the turmoil on the temple grounds, someone tried to help the Messiah escape. The temple grounds were off limit and had to be purified. The Roman soldiers monitored the grounds after the gates were closed. According to the scrolls, the Messiah found refuge in one of the underground tunnels that only the priests were aware of at the time. It seems the Messiah was caught and then imprisoned in the fortress of Antonia. The high priest's palace was in the fortress of Antonia, which was on the temple grounds. There was also a prison in Antonia that had thick walls and heavy chains to strap the prisoner, as the Messiah described in the thanksgiving hymns of the scrolls. The high priest wore a full-length tunic as well as a sacred robe, and it was his right alone to wear it. After Archelaus was deposed and exiled, and sometime during the period of Coponius's deployment to Palestine, 6 to 9 CE, most likely towards the end, the Romans decided to control the high priest's sacred robe. Why did the Romans suddenly interfere with this ancient Jewish custom? Flavius Josephus does not give any detailed reasons, but he states that the new rules were put into place to monitor the sacred robe during festivals. He described the new precautions implemented by the Romans for access to the sacred vestments. He said, "It was under the seal of the high priest and the treasurers of the temple, and one day before the festival, the treasurers would go to the commander of the Roman garrison, and after inspecting their own seal, would take the robe. Then, when the festival was over, they would bring it back to the same place, and after showing the commander of the garrison a seal corresponding to the first one, would again deposit the robe. Now, this digression has been occasioned by the sad experiences that happened later." That's what he said in volume 15. That was a section cut out from volume 18 by the Byzantine Church, after which they inserted 2 forged passages on Jesus, who was the Christ, and John the Baptist. What the Romans were making sure of is that the right person was getting access to the robe. Showing the seal before and after was a way to be certain that the robe did not get into the hands of the wrong person. This was not a matter of exerting control of a robe in order to take charge of local customs, nor to punish the Jews. This was an obvious intent to make sure that some serious error did not take place again, where someone other than the official high priest was able to get hold of the robe, causing it to get into the wrong hands. From the time of Hyrcanus I in 135 BC, who first built Antonia and used it as his residence, to the time of Herod's son Archelaus, the custom of keeping the robe in Antonia continued as a tradition. Sometime after Archelaus was banished to Vienna, the robe came under Roman control and was kept in a stone building that was highly guarded. The stone building was part of Antonia. Flavius Josephus continued, "When the Romans took over the government, they retained control of the high priest's vestments and kept them in a stone building where they were under the seal both of the priests and of the custodians of the treasury, and where the warden of the guard lighted the lamp day by day. 7 days before each festival, the vestments were delivered to the priest by the warden. After they had been purified, the high priest wore them. Then after the first day of the festival, he put them back again in the building where they were laid away before. This was the procedure at the 3 festivals each year and on the fast day. The 3 festivals were Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. The fast day was the Day of Atonement." The Romans did not give up control of the robe until the rule of Agrippa II in 48 CE, when Vitellius returned custody of the robe to the priests. He gave orders to the warden, who had previously monitored the control of the robe, to no longer interfere with the question of where they were to be stored or when they should be used. It should be clear by now that the robe had something to do with how the Messiah Isa escaped from prison. The high priest's robe must have been removed from the temple and its grounds for a length of time during a festival, causing some sort of uproar, leading the Romans to keep it under high security. We know that Archelaus had appointed an unknown priest as high priest at the end of his rule named Yeshua, son of C, or Jesus, son of C, and nothing was written about him in any of the histories of Flavius Josephus, which is very unusual. Josephus gave at least some details about all the high priests he mentioned except this one. Taking advantage of the interim period between the removal of Archelaus and the arrival of the Roman procurator Coponius, Joazar, supported by the Zealots, most likely reinstated himself as high priest. The circumstances of how that happened were also deleted from the writings of Flavius Josephus. The Zealots had no respect for the high priesthood. Before the fall of the temple, they even chose a random person to be high priest and chose him by drawing lots. He was not of the correct lineage, but they didn't care. Before the temple was destroyed, the Zealots had become so impudent that they murdered the high priest Ananias and his brother Ezekias. One son of Judas the Galilean, Menahem, was commander of the rebellion against Rome during the final days of the temple. He pretended to be king and directed the revolution from the palace. He became so tyrannical that he was murdered by his own followers as he prayed in the temple dressed in royal garments. While the Messiah Isa was in prison in Antonia, his followers could not have let him out by way of the underground tunnels where he was caught once before. The temple grounds were empty, and anyone walking across them would have been seen by the Romans who were watching over all the porticos of the temple grounds. They were positioned along the towers of Antonia, where they would have had clear views and would also have been guarding the gates of the temple. An escape of a prisoner locked in the dungeons of Antonia would have been immediately detected. The Messiah was also chained with heavy chains. Only a high official could order the chains removed. The only way he could escape is if he was in heavy disguise. Could the escape in a disguise have been an idea thought of by members of the Messiah's Pharisee council? Absolutely. In the great Pharisee tradition, Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai urged the Zealots to surrender to Rome in 68 CE, disguised as a corpse. He had his students carry him away from the turmoil of Jerusalem in a casket. Another member of the community of the elect was Philip, son of Josimus of the Beni Bathira. Philip managed to escape from the Zealots in Jerusalem and travel to Gamala while disguised in a wig. Did these rabbis perhaps learn the art of escape in disguise from the greatest escape in history, that of the Messiah Isa? The legitimate and deposed high priest, Yeshua, Jesus, son of Si, made the greatest sacrifice of all. Having been a high priest himself, he had easy access to the high priest's robe stored in Antonia. While Joazar was busy purifying the temple, Jesus, son of Si, with the assistance of the rabbis, wore the robe and pretended to be Joazar. Jesus gained permission from the Roman procurator to access the Messiah Isa in his prison. The Romans would have had to unshackle the Messiah Isa. Jesus then disrobed and dressed the Messiah Isa in the high priest's robe. The Messiah Isa then walked through the northwest gate, escorted by his council of Pharisee leaders, and headed toward the road to Galilee. Jesus, the legitimate high priest, remained in the prison cell and was willing, like a paschal lamb, to die for the sins of his people. Did the Messiah Isa suspect that Jesus, son of Si, would actually be crucified? Well, from the gospel narratives, two of the Messiah's followers, who had been told by the women at the sepulchre that his body was missing, then traveled to the same day to the village of Emmaus. As they conversed about the crucifixion, the Messiah joined them and participated in the conversation. They didn't recognize him at first, but he asked them, "What manner of communications are these that you have one to another as you walk and are sad?" They asked, "How could he have not heard? Was he a stranger in Jerusalem?" The Messiah then asked what happened. After they told him that the Messiah was crucified, he chided them for their ignorance in believing such a thing. There were sightings of the Messiah in different parts of Palestine according to the Gospels. Obviously, he wasn't crucified, and he was not a ghost. Jesus, son of Si, went willingly to his death and bore the scourge of the Romans and the mockery of the Romans. in the mockery of his people and asked God to forgive them, for they did not know what they were doing. The gentle high priest sacrificed himself for the sins of his people and hoped God would accept his sacrifice. Did he believe he was fulfilling his own destiny? Did he believe he was the person whom Isaiah referred to in his prophecy? He was oppressed and he was afflicted, Isaiah said, yet he opened not his mouth. He is brought as a lamb to the slaughter. He was taken from prison and from judgment, and who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He hath put him to grief, when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin. Who knew better how to make an offering for the sins of his people than a high priest? He was reenacting the rituals of the Day of Atonement. As legitimate high priest, he was God's representative on earth. Decades later, to the followers of the Christian cult promoted by Paul, he became the physical Son of God. Like the scapegoat in the ceremony of the Sabbath of affliction, when the two goats were chosen by the high priest, one was the Lord's goat and the other was the scapegoat who would bear the sins of the people. The high priest chose himself as the scapegoat, who would be sent away to his death, escorted by a person of good repute, as the ceremony required, much as Luke states that Simon the Cyrenian carried Jesus' cross to Golgotha. Did Jesus think he was going to be saved? Well, according to the Gospel of Mark, he cried out for God's help. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? And some of them said that stood by, when they heard it, said, Behold, he called Elias, who was Elijah. Was he expecting the Messiah Isa to rescue him? Since many believed he was the returned prophet Elijah, many Jews believed the prophet Elias returned to life as the Messiah Isa. The women who accompanied the Messiah Isa from Galilee could only see the crucifixion from a distance, for they stood afar off beholding these things. They could not see who was being crucified. The Quran confirms that the Messiah Isa was not placed on the cross, that they said, We killed the Messiah Isa, the son of Maryam, the messenger of Allah. But they did not kill him, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them. And those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no knowledge, but only conjecture to follow. For of a surety they did not kill him. What happened after the Messiah Isa escaped? For that, return to the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Messiah Isa knew that the truth would one day be revealed, and said, For thou, O my God, thou wilt plead my cause, for it is according to the mystery of thy wisdom that thou hast rebuked me. Thou wilt conceal the truth until its time, and righteousness until its appointed moment. The Messiah Isa knew that Allah would use his story to condemn in judgment all those who assail me, distinguishing through me between the just and the wicked. The high priest Joazar probably learned of the supreme act of deception and discovered that the robe had left the temple grounds. He would have been furious at the act of deception. The scroll's title commentary in Habakkuk states that the wicked priest pursued the teacher of righteousness to the house of his exile, that he might confuse him with his venomous fury. And at the time appointed for rest, for the Day of Atonement, he appeared before them to confuse them and to cause them to stumble on the day of fasting, their Sabbath of repose. The Messiah Isa was wounded, most likely from the attacks against him by the high priest Joazar. He wrote, My wound breaks out like burning fire shut up in my bones, whose flames devour me for days on end, diminishing my strength for times on end. The pains fly out towards me, and my soul within me languishes even to death. How can I rise in view of my wound? Or my arm is torn from its socket, and I can lift my hand no more. My knees slide like water. I can no longer walk. The Messiah Isa was disillusioned and heartbroken by the spectacle of evil and the bloodshed. He was dismayed by the mischievous design for Belial's manifest in their evil inclination. Feeling so distraught that it affected him physically, My bones are pulled out of joint, my bowels heave like a ship in a violent tempest, and my heart is utterly distressed. A whirlwind engulfs me because of the mischief of their sin. He was with his disciples at the time, since he said, I have no word for my disciples to revive the spirit of those who stumble and to speak words of support to the weary. The Quran states that the Messiah Isa lived on until Allah raised him unto himself. The Messiah Isa, the teacher of righteousness, was sure that he would be protected by God. Until I am old, thou wilt care for me. My oppressor shall not prevail against me. I will be a stumbling block to those who swallow me up, and a snare to all those who battle against me. Thou wilt bring healing to my wound and marvelous might in place of my stumbling. That is the last we know of what happened to him. Sometime during this period, Hillel disappeared from memory as well. Did he perhaps lose his life protecting the Messiah Isa? Or did he escort him to his place of exile? Did they perhaps return to Babylonia? Or was this when the Messiah Isa was raised to Allah? The scrolls were placed by the rabbis in secluded caves near Qumran in order to protect them from the wars between the Zealots and the Romans. The location was perfect, in a dry climate and caves that no travelers used, waiting for 2,000 years to be discovered in 1947, on the eve of the creation of the State of Israel. One of the signs that the hour of judgment is approaching is that the Muslims will once again fight with the Jews. As the Quran forewarns, the Messiah Isa would be one of the signs that the hour of judgment is approaching. Quirinius no doubt heard of Joazar's pursuit of the Messiah Isa and his council, and his support of the seditious, the Zealots, since Flavius Josephus states that Joazar had now been overpowered by a popular faction. As punishment, Joazar was stripped of his title as high priest and replaced by Ananus, the son of Seth. The scrolls state that he was humbled and delivered into the hands of the enemy. During the 3rd century CE, the heresy hunters of the Byzantine Church were looking for anyone who dared tell the truth about the trial and crucifixion. Out of fear, many hid and buried their writings. Among these are the Gnostic texts discovered in Egypt in 1945 that make up the Nag Hammadi library. One of the texts is called the Second Treatise of the Great Seth. It says, "Let us seize him." Others again, "The plan will certainly not materialize. And I was in the mouths of lions, and the plan which they devised about me to release their error and their senselessness, I did not succumb to them as they had planned, but I was not afflicted at all. Those who were there punished me, and I did not die in reality, but in appearance, lest I be put to shame by them, because these are my kinfolk. I removed the shame from me, and I did not become faint-hearted in the face of what happened to me at their hands. For my death, which they think happened to them in their error and blindness, since they nailed their man unto their death. It was another, their father, who drank the gall and the vinegar. It was not I. It was another upon whom they placed the crown of thorns. But I was rejoicing in the height over all the wealth of the archons, and the offspring of their error, of their empty glory. And I was laughing at their ignorance. When I was at their gates, I assumed their likeness. For I passed them by quietly, and I was viewing the places, and I was not afraid nor ashamed, for I was undefiled. And I was speaking with them, mingling with them through those that are mine, and trampling on those who are harsh to them with zeal, and quenching the flame. And I was doing all these things because of my desire to accomplish what I desired by the will of the Father above. The lions were the Zealots. Their father was their high priest, who obviously was crucified. The archons were the chief magistrates, symbolizing the wealth of the Sadducee Sanhedrin. It was the highest legislative and judicial body that presided over Jewish affairs in Jerusalem. The gates were the temple gates that were closed, where he mingled with his supporters. Those with zeal are the Zealots. He was undefiled, since the grounds of the temple were defiled. Evidently, there were people in Palestine who knew exactly what happened and who was crucified. It is the Byzantine Church that wanted to silence the truth and pretended they were heresy hunters. To them, heresy was telling the truth. Paul, Saul, one of the founders of Christianity, was born between 10 to 15 CE in Tarsus in today's Turkey, several years after the crucifixion story. He was a student of Gamaliel. The Pharisees were monitoring the dangerous cult that appeared in Palestine, where people were worshipping a high priest who martyred himself. Paul was sent to Damascus to bring back prisoners, members of the cult, at the request of the religious hierarchy for punishment. Paul traveled throughout Syria and Cilicia to Antioch and Arabia and claimed that a ghostly Jesus appeared to him near Damascus, the lands of the Beni Bathira, and asked him why he was persecuting him. The apparition told him, "I am Jesus whom thou persecutest. It is hard for thee to kick against the pricks. Arise and go into the city, and it shall be told thee what thou must do." The apparition told Paul that he, Jesus, was chosen to preach to the Gentiles, an entirely new religion. Those who knew what happened during the crucifixion knew Paul was crazy. The problem was that Paul was a Roman citizen, so the Jews could not try him outside of a Roman court. It's obvious Paul was a liar, and the Jews had accused him of lying and wanted to kill him as a dangerous false prophet. That is why the Messiah Isa warned his people that many shall come in my name, saying, "I am Christ," and shall deceive many, and many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. The writings of the early Christians all said their Jesus was a high priest. The epistle of Paul to the Hebrews referred to Jesus as the scepter of God's kingdom, using words that describe the final messenger of God. They describe Jesus as an apostle and high priest of our profession. Again, they use the word high priest, and high priest, and high priest, and again high priest. You can't get more obvious than that. The description is clear as day as they describe their high priest and his role during Passover. Christ being come, and high priest of good things to come, neither by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood he entered in once into the holy place, having obtained eternal redemption for us. For if the blood of bulls and of goats and the ashes of an heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctify to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God? The Messiah Isa was never a high priest. He was an anointed prophet, a Messiah, the final one sent to the Beni Israel. The cult of Christians didn't care about the man described in the Gospels. They were obsessed with the sacrifice of the martyred high priest. They falsely claimed he was the Messiah, the final one that the Jews were waiting for, and still are. Instead of being a second Moses, they decided he would die for their sins and liberate them from Jewish laws. Flavius Josephus confirmed that the destruction of the temple had been forewarned. He described the situation in Palestine prior to the destruction, where there were people who were misled by cheats and false messengers of God, and still couldn't imagine that the temple was about to be destroyed because of the actions of the zealots. Paul was one of those false messengers. The Messiah in the Gospels warned of the temple's destruction, that there would be nothing left of it. The Quran says the same thing. So when the second of the warnings came to pass, we permitted your enemies to disfigure your faces, and to enter your temples as they had entered it before, and to visit with destruction all that fell into their power. In the words of Habakkuk, as shown in the scrolls, the stone cries out from the wall, and the beam from the woodwork replies, words that matched perfectly the events witnessed by all. As Flavius Josephus described all the events in detail, he said the priests who were performing the appropriate rituals in the inner court of the temple heard mysterious voices and sounds, a violent movement and a loud crash, then a concerted cry, "Let us go hence!" The scrolls warned, woe to him who builds a city with blood and founds a town upon falsehood. Amidst all this trauma, it is not difficult to imagine that some people would recall a Messiah who had warned them about this, and would begin writing versions of his life in the Gospels. The year that the temple was destroyed was the year that the first Gospel was written by Mark. The scroll titled A Lament for Zion, written in the final century BC, describes the temple in the future as it burnt by fire and overthrown, and it would be overtaken by wild animals, the zealots, and the wrath of God shall descend on them. Flavius Josephus wrote, "The sanctuary was set on fire in defiance of Caesar's wishes. Titus had done everything he could to stop the fire. The fire was caused by the zealots." The scroll's commentary in Habakkuk warned about the last priests of Jerusalem, who shall amass money and wealth by plundering the peoples. But in the last days their riches and booty shall be delivered into the hands of the army of the Kittim, the Romans. That is exactly what happened. The people brought all their wealth to the temple for safety, and after the zealots and people burnt within the temple, the treasures were taken by Rome. What were Paul's motives for promoting the cult of Christians who decided to worship the high priest? The Messiah Isa was preparing his people for the arrival of a messenger who would come from the Arabs. The yoke of ruling the faithful would be handed to the people the Jews hated the most, the Arabs. To Paul, that was unacceptable. Paul rejected the law, said they didn't need to follow any of the prior scriptures, and they were not going to follow any Arab messenger, since the Arabs were not the children of promise, like the Jews. Paul wrote in Galatians, "For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. But he who was of a bondwoman was born after the flesh, but he of the free woman was by promise. Now we brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. What saith the Scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of a bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman. We are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. If you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, you are fallen from grace." Once Paul and his cult spread Christianity to the Gentiles, the religion took on a different character. The Church of Rome had visions of conquests, and the new religion suited them perfectly. The apostolic fathers of the Church continued in Paul's footsteps. Clement, who was Bishop of Rome in the later part of the 1st century, wrote in the first epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, "This is the way, beloved, in which we found our salvation, Jesus Christ, the high priest of our offerings, the defender and helper of our weakness." He spoke of the self-sacrifice of Jesus, the high priest, who became the example for others who had given themselves up to death, that they might rescue their subjects through their own blood. Many among ourselves have given themselves to bondage, that they might ransom others. The Catholic Church is filled with statues of saints who died as martyrs, claiming their acts gave them special powers to save others. Clement repeated throughout his writings that Jesus was a high priest. Jesus Christ, the high priest and guardian of our souls, our high priest and guardian Jesus Christ, through whom be to him glory and majesty, might and honor, both now and to all eternity. And how great suffering Jesus Christ endured for our sake. In the Epistle of Ignatius, 3rd Bishop of Antioch, who was martyred in Rome in 108, by the animals of the Colosseum, promoted a break between Christianity and Judaism. It is monstrous to talk of Jesus Christ and to practice Judaism, for Christianity did not base its faith on Judaism, but Judaism on Christianity. Ignatius wrote, "The priests likewise are noble, but the high priest, who has been entrusted with the Holy of Holies, is greater, and only to him have the secret things of God been entrusted. He is the door of the Father, through which enter Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the prophets, and the apostles and the church." The Bishop of Smyrna, who lived in the first half of the 2nd century and died in 155, believed Christians should suffer as Jesus did on the cross. They were fascinated by the act of martyrdom. He called Jesus the eternal priest. Let us then be imitators of his endurance, and if we suffer for his name's sake, let us glorify him, for this is the example which he gave us in himself. The Epistle of Barnabas, quoted out of Hosea, believing the reference to the high priest. He was wounded for our transgressions and bruised for our iniquities. In section 7 of the epistle, this Christian equated the sacrifice of Jesus with the sacrifice of the 2 goats in the Sabbath of affliction. He compared Jesus to the accursed goat that is bound with a scarlet wool about his head and is sent accompanied into the wilderness. Like Jesus with his crown of thorns, he said the accursed is crowned. The only way to join Jesus was through pain and suffering. Christianity became a religion, was fascinated with martyrdom. In the martyrdom of St. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, one had to die a brutal death in order to join Jesus. For some were torn by scourging until the mechanism of their flesh was seen even to the lower veins and arteries, and they endured so that even bystanders pitied them and mourned. And some even reached such a pitch of nobility that none of them groaned or wailed, showing to all of us that at that hour of their torture, the noble martyrs of Christ were absent from the flesh, or rather that the Lord was standing by and talking to them. Christianity had nothing to do with the religion of the Messiah Isa. As the Prophet Muhammad said, both in this world and in the hereafter, I am the nearest of all the people to Isa, the son of Maryam. The prophets are paternal brothers, their mothers are different, but their religion is one. The teacher of righteousness, the Messiah Isa, told God, Thou art a father to all the sons of thy truth, meaning the prophets. Is there evidence that the rabbinic sages knew the messenger of God who was foretold by the Messiah Isa was from the Arabs? Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai, who picked up the community after the fall of the temple, comforted his students by teaching them not to concern themselves with historical events, but to be concerned with their daily problems. He warned his followers not to expect the expiation of sins to arrive quickly. He said God would forgive them only if they atoned for their sins, and the period of atonement would be very long. He said, All my life I have been reading the following verse, and I have not until now realized its full meaning. If you do not know, O fairest among women, follow in the tracks of the flock and pasture your kids beside the shepherd's tents. And when you do not obey the will of God, you are handed over into the hands of every low-born people, not even only into the hands of the people, but even into the power of the cattle of that low-born people. Rabbi ben Zakkai encouraged his disciples to accept their fate under Roman rule and to abide by the laws interpreted by the sages. They were warned that there would be false messiahs who would appear to deceive them and create their own following. There were many. One was Ben Goziba, Bar Kokhba, who was connected to the rabbis who established their academy at Yavne in Jaffa after the fall of the temple. Many scrolls were discovered and dated to his time period. According to the Babylonian Talmud, he was a charlatan. The rabbinic sages who lived during the middle of the 4th century BC found it hard to believe that their counterparts of the mid-2nd century could not recognize Bar Kokhba as a fraud. The Bar Kokhba rebellion brought more hardship on them from the Romans. The Shema was no longer permitted to be read, religious festivals were forbidden, and none of their rituals were allowed. Bar Kokhba was hoping to regain Jerusalem. Rabbi ben Zakkai is reputed to have said that the temple was destroyed because God no longer wanted their sacrifices, but preferred their kindness to one another. He quoted Hosea, For I desired mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than burnt offerings. The scroll writers were describing the future under the final messenger of God. May you smite the peoples with the might of your hand and ravage the earth with your scepter. May you bring death to the ungodly with the breath of your lips. For God has established you as the scepter, the rulers, and all the kings of the nations shall serve you. He shall strengthen you with his holy name. The scrolls said the final messenger of God would establish the kingdom of his people forever and would be a splendid jewel in the midst of the congregation of saints. The scrolls describe the rabbinic sages who were the best of Jacob, the priests, his righteous people. Rabbi Ben Zakkai remarked that the Jews would pay the ultimate price for not obeying the Torah. They would become servants of a people who they considered to be beneath them. The scrolls describe the holy warriors of the Islamic armies. The scroll, titled in Aramaic Apocalypse, states that the final messenger's followers would reign for years on the earth, and they will trample all. People will trample people, and one province and another province vacate until the people of God will arise, and all will rest from the sword. Their kingdom will be an eternal kingdom, and all their path will be in truth. They will judge the earth in truth, and all will make peace. The great God is their helper. He will wage war for them. Their dominion will be an eternal dominion. God shall sanctify some of the holy as an everlasting sanctuary for himself, and purity shall endure among the cleansed. They shall be priests, his righteous people, his hosts, servants, the angels of his glory. They shall praise him with marvelous prodigies. Confirming the prophet Ezekiel's words that God would purify them with clean water, and they would be given a new spirit, removing the stony heart, and would give them a heart of flesh. The Quran said that Allah altered the hearts of his people, so they would reject even those within their families who have rejected faith. The Quran says he has written faith in their hearts and strengthened them with a spirit from himself. But Allah has endeared the faith to you and has made it beautiful in your hearts, and he has made hateful to you unbelief, wickedness, and rebellion. Such indeed are those who walk in righteousness, a grace and favor from Allah, and Allah is full of knowledge and wisdom. The prophet Isaiah had forewarned that Israel would be called by a new name, which the mouth of the Lord shall name. The Quran confirms it. This day, those who reject faith have given up all hope of your religion. Do not fear them, but fear me. This day I have perfected your religion for you, completed my favor upon you, and have chosen for you Islam as your religion. The Israelites who accepted the final messenger of God changed their name to Muslims. They would no longer be known as Israelites. The Bible said that God told the prophet Musa, I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. According to Ibn Ishaq, the historian of the Prophet Muhammad, the Prophet had said he was a friend and brother of Musa, who confirms the revelation which Musa brought. Since Musa's laws influenced those of Lipit Ishtar and Hammurabi, then we know the original laws of Musa were closer to what we find in the Quran. Many sections in Isaiah describe the Islamic conquest, words that also appear in the Gospels. The voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill shall be made low, and the crooked shall be made straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together, for the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. The war scroll fulfilled. The scroll describes a 40-year period, out of which there will be 35 years of warfare between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. During the first 6 years, the whole congregation shall fight it together. The Islamic lunar calendar begins with the Hijrah, 622, when the covenant was established in Medina. From the beginning of the Hijrah to Medina, 6 years passed when the believers experienced several wars against the pagans in Badr, Uhud, and Khandak. During these years, the Muslims were prevented from performing their pilgrimage in Umrah to Mecca, since the Quraysh were in control of Mecca. After 6 years, the Prophet received a vision that he and the Muslims would securely enter the sanctuary in Mecca under Allah's protection. The scroll says 6 years of battles would be followed by a year of rest, the 7th year, when temple worship would be restored. During the 7th year that began with the Hijrah, 628, the Prophet established a truce with the Quraysh of Mecca, culminating with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The 7th year witnessed the restoration of worship at the sacred mosque in Mecca. The scroll says there was 1 year of no war, when the temple worship would be restored. There would be another 4 years of no war, making a total of 5 years of release, for they are the Sabbaths of rest. The 4 years were when the prophet was uniting the Hejaz and eastern parts of the Arabian Peninsula and Oman. The death of the prophet brought confusion to the community regarding how they should rule and who should succeed. The scroll says, during the remaining 29 years, the war should be divided. The Islamic wars took place on many fronts, each commanded by different caliphs, who delegated the conquest to various generals. The Byzantine Emperor Heraclius was defeated at Yarmouk, east of Galilee, in 636. By 642, Egypt came under their control, defeating the Byzantine hold. The Sasanians were defeated at Al-Qadisiyah in southern Iraq, and from there, Khuzestan and Azerbaijan came under the control of the Muslim armies. Around the middle of the 650s, the Muslim Empire extended between Libya and eastern Iran, and as far north as southern Armenia. The first caliphs ruled from 632 to 661, exactly 29 years. The war scroll described a 40-year period to establish the first phase of the Islamic Empire. 6 plus 29 years of war is 35. 1 plus 4 years of no war is 5. 35 plus 5 equals 40 years. The war scroll was fulfilled. The first 6 years of the war scroll. In 3 lots shall the sons of light brace themselves in battle to strike down iniquity, and in 3 lots shall Belial's host gird itself to thrust back the company of God. And when the hearts of the detachments of foot soldiers faint, then shall the might of God fortify the hearts of the sons of light. If this is a reference to the 3 battles, then it is a reference to Badr, Uhud, and Khandak. In conclusion, in the treaty of Hudaybiyah, Allah told his messenger, "Verily, we have granted you a manifest victory, that Allah may forgive you your faults of the past and those to follow, fulfill his favor to you and guide you on the straight way, and that Allah may help you with powerful help." When the Kaaba, the Holy of Holies, of the center of the sanctuary, was cleansed of idols, the Prophet was told, "Say the truth is now manifest, falsehood is truly confuted, and it is right that it should be." The Quran, "O Prophet, rouse the believers to the fight. If there are 20 amongst you patient and persevering, they will vanquish 200. If 100, they will vanquish 1,000 of the unbelievers, for these are people without understanding." The war scroll quoted from Deuteronomy. The priest would exhort his people that when they would prepare for battle, they should not fear, for your God goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, that he may deliver you. The teacher of righteousness said, "The sword of God, who would awaken the sons of his truth to overthrow wickedness. The hero shall bend his bow. The everlasting gate shall send out weapons of war." War scroll. "Valiant warriors of the angelic host are among our numbered men, and the hero of war is with our congregation. The host of his spirits is with our foot soldiers and horsemen. They are as clouds of dew covering the earth. Recall that the Messiah in the Gospels tells the high priest, 'I say unto you, hereafter you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven.' As I previously explained, the clouds of heaven were symbolic language for the angels, and is absolutely not a reference to a returning Messiah falsely named Jesus, so misunderstood by Christianity. The war scroll names the angels who would participate in the battles: Michael, Gabriel, Ariel, Raphael. The Pharisees knew the names of the angels. The Sadducees did not recognize them. War scroll. "Whoever shall not be clean because of his font on that night shall not go with them to the battle, for the holy angels shall be with their formations together." The Muslims performed ablution before going out to battle, as they were in the company of angels. Scroll titled "Rule of War" states, "For God is with you, and his holy angels standing in your congregation, and his holy name shall be invoked upon you in your midst." The greatly outnumbered early Muslim community battled with Gabriel by their side, horse in hand and armed for war. The revelation that came after the Battle of Badr states, "It is not you who slew them, it was Allah. When you threw a handful of dust, it was not your act, but Allah's, in order that he might test the believers by a gracious trial from himself." A wooden club in the hands of Ukasha became a long, strong, gleaming sword to replace the one broken in his battle with Quraysh. He named it Al-Aun, meaning divine help. The believers were not alone on the battlefield, for they had been promised 1,000 of the angels, rank on ranks. "Remember, your Lord inspired the angels with a message, 'I am with you. Give firmness to the believers. I will instill terror into the hearts of the unbelievers. Smite them above their necks and smite all their fingertips off them.' This because they contended against Allah and his messenger. If they contend against Allah and his messenger, Allah is strict in punishment. Yes, if you remain firm and act right, even if the enemy should rush here on you in hot haste, your Lord would help you with 5,000 angels making a terrific onslaught." The early historians recorded many strange occurrences during the battles. One of the believers was pursuing a man of the enemy, and the man's head flew off from his body before he could reach him, struck by an unseen hand. Others had brief glimpses of the angels riding on horses whose hooves never touched the ground, led by Gabriel wearing a yellow turban, whereas the turbans of the other angels were white, with one end left streaming behind them. In one scroll, it had been foretold that the prophet will know the secrets of men. Their designs against him will fail because he is the chosen one of God. According to the historians of the period, on many an occasion the prophet knew things discussed in private that no one else could have known, and when questioned, he would say, "Gabriel told me," or he would say, "I only know what Allah has given me to know." The Prophet Muhammad was kept informed in the revelations of the Quran about what to expect on the battlefield. "O you who believe, take not into your intimacy those outside your ranks. They will not fail to corrupt you. They only desire your ruin. Rank hatred has already appeared from their mouths. What their hearts conceal is far worse. But if you are constant and do right, not the least harm will their cunning do to you, for Allah encompasses round about all that they do." Confirming the resurrection of souls, which was expected to take place during the period, the Quran states, "Think not of those who are slain in Allah's way as dead. Nay, they live, finding their sustenance in the presence of their Lord." This was the first resurrection described in the Bible's revelation. Contrary to what evangelical Christians believe, Revelation is about the Islamic conquests, not a returning Jesus. The first resurrection is the rapture that evangelical Christians have invented for themselves. The Israelite scholars were expecting 2 messiahs, 2 Christs. Christos was Greek for Messiah, causing Christians to misunderstand Revelation, which is about the second Messiah that the Israelites were expecting. He was the warrior prophet. Between 628 and 632, the prophet struggled to bring the nomadic tribes to Islam. And when the Quraysh had joined the ranks of the believers, they helped unify Arabia. Once Mecca came under the complete control of the messenger, he forgave the people who fought against him and the believers. He proclaimed a general amnesty to them and the convicts. From then on, no killing was permitted, especially in Mecca. The scrolls and the prophetic literature all said he would liberate the captives. One scroll quoted from Psalm, "The Lord looseth the prisoners. The Lord openeth the eyes of the blind, raiseth them that are bowed down. The Lord loveth the righteous." The Quran Surah Al-Anfal says, "It is not fitting for a prophet that he should have prisoners of war until he has thoroughly subdued the land. You look for the temporal goods of this world, but Allah looks to the hereafter, and Allah is exalted in might, wise." After the conquest of Mecca, the messenger of Allah asked his kinsmen, the Quraysh, what they expected he would do with them. They responded, "Everything good, for you are a noble brother and a noble nephew of ours." The messenger responded, "Rise then and go, for you are free." He liberated the captives as foretold. It was a complete fulfillment of the prophecies found in the scrolls and the Bible. The war scroll refers to the leaders of the community as sons of Zadok. Abu Bakr was named as-Sadiq, meaning the true equivalent to Zadok. He would be succeeded by caliphs Umar ibn al-Khattab and Uthman ibn Affan. The war scroll states that among the enemies of the last messenger would be the violators of the covenant. They are the ones who agreed to the covenant with the Messiah Isa and then rejected it. They were the Jews who allied themselves with the pagans and referred to as the sons of darkness. The Messiah Isa knew it would be many of his people who would fight the final messenger of God. That is why Allah sent him to warn his people of the future. The Damascus document states that God hated the builders of the wall, who would reject the commandments of God and abandon them for the stubbornness of their hearts. The war scroll foretold that the sons of Levi, the sons of Judah, and the sons of Benjamin would join the pagans in fighting the sons of light, and would be those exiled to the wilderness who have violated the covenant. The sons of Levi, Judah, and Benjamin are the Jews and a few of the Israelites. The rabbinic sages, like the Beni Bathira, cautioned that it would be the Jews who would try to kill the final messenger of God. The Jewish tribes of Arabia did exactly that. Many surahs in the Quran are dedicated to assisting the Prophet Muhammad in dealing with the Jews. As a result, the Prophet did exile them to the wilderness because of their treachery. The biblical prophecies, including Isaiah and Matthew, as well as the words of the rabbinic sages, all point to the conclusion that the yoke or burden of ruling the faithful was removed by Allah from the shoulders of the Bani Israel and was given to the descendants of Ismail the Arabs. The covenant with Musa placed the burden of religious teachings on the high priesthood. The rules now changed. The political and religious leadership of the faithful was to fall into the hands of the most qualified religious leaders chosen by the people. The Mishnah states that there is an order one should abide by regarding who is superior in religious knowledge. The high priest is above the Levite, who in turn is above the Israelite, who in turn is above the bastard. However, if the bastard happens to be the best qualified and most learned, and the high priest is ignorant and of poor qualifications, then the bastard takes over above the high priest. The Prophet Muhammad imparted the same message. The superiority of the learned over the devout is like that of the moon on the night when it is full over the rest of the stars. The learned are the heirs of the prophets, and the prophets leave no monetary inheritance. They leave only knowledge, and he who takes it takes an abundant portion. The Islamic liberation of Jerusalem. Confirming the prophecies in the Dead Sea Scroll, the Islamic armies led by Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab liberated Jerusalem. Sophronius was Patriarch of Jerusalem. The transfer of power to the Muslims was a peaceful one, as was the case in Damascus. When the time came for Umar to enter Jerusalem as the city's liberator, it is said that he entered on the back of a donkey, while his men sat on horseback. His men were surprised that he would do that. Sophronius was bedecked in his fancy attire like a Jewish high priest. The Byzantine Church readily adopted the traditions of the Jews, whose high priest represented God on earth. The same can be seen in the Catholic Church, where the Pope is the high priest of Christianity who sits on the Holy See, Apostolic See, like Jesus, Son of See. The Catholic clergy would forever be emulating his martyrdom. The Caliph Umar showed humility as he entered Jerusalem on a donkey. Was the image a sign to the Jews that their king had arrived? The scroll's day of vengeance had materialized. As Zechariah states, O daughter of Jerusalem, behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just, and having salvation, lowly, and riding upon an ass. And his dominion shall be from sea to sea, and from the river even to the ends of the earth. The Caliph Umar was a fulfillment of prophecy. The Bible makes it clear how to know if some event is a fulfillment of prophecy. When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing follows not, nor comes to pass, that is the thing which the Lord hath not spoken. The prophet which prophesieth of peace, when the word of the prophet shall come to pass, then shall the prophet be known that the Lord hath truly sent him. The Dead Sea Scrolls should now be recognized as the prophecies of the Messiah Isa, since all the events described did happen. Most of the events were also foretold by prior prophets and the Gospels, even the fact that the Jews would be the ones to reject their warnings. Jews were never permitted to have their own state at any time in the future. They would have to accept their status as a minority within the Islamic world if they choose to not accept the final covenant. They would be protected as long as they never waged war against the Muslim majority in the kingdom of God on earth. Their treachery would not be tolerated. As the Quran confirms, it was envy, a desire to kindle the fire of war, a lack of genuine faith that brought the Jews to always pit themselves against the Muslims. The Quran states, "When they come to you, they say, 'We believe,' but in fact they enter with a mind against faith, and they go out with the same, but Allah knows fully all that they hide. Many of them do you see racing each other in sin and transgression in their eating of things forbidden. Evil indeed are the things that they do. Why do not the rabbis and doctors of law forbid them from their habit of uttering sinful words and eating things forbidden? Evil indeed are their works. The Jews say Allah's hand is tied up. Be their hands tied up, and be they accursed for the blasphemy they utter. No, both his hands are widely outstretched. He gives and spends as he pleases, but the revelation that comes to you from Allah increases in most of them their obstinate rebellion and blasphemy." The Quran surahs and Ma'idah continue. "Among them we have placed enmity and hatred until the day of judgment. Every time they kindle the fire of war, Allah does extinguish it. But they strive to do mischief on earth, and Allah does not love those who do mischief. If only the people of the book had believed and been righteous, we should indeed have blotted out their iniquities and admitted them to the gardens of bliss. If only they had stood fast by the law, the Injil, and all the revelation that was sent to them from their Lord, they would have enjoyed happiness from every side. There is from among them a part on the right course, but many of them follow a course that is evil." The New Jerusalem Scroll and the Temple Scroll. The scrolls were dated to the Herodian period, as were the other apocalyptic scrolls. During the scholarly debates, the dimensions given for the Temple in the New Jerusalem are too large for Palestinian Jerusalem. So some scholars argue that it has to be an imaginary temple. Palestinian Jerusalem was named Urushalim, or Urushalim. Scholars analyzed the second version of the name and decided the root word comes from a combination of two elements, Yerwa and Shlim, which means the foundation of Shalom. In Ugarit, Shalom was the god of twilight. Comical as this interpretation is, I will correct their bizarre analysis. The root of the word Urushalim is Sumerian. The prophet Ibrahim lived in Sumer and spoke Sumerian. In that language, Uru means city and Selim means peace. The prophet Ibrahim had asked Allah to make Mecca a city of peace. He was asking that Mecca be made into an Jerusalem, a Jerusalem. Making Mecca as the New Jerusalem was a complete fulfillment of the New Jerusalem and Temple Scrolls. It was also a fulfillment of Allah's promise to the prophet Ibrahim. Palestinian Jerusalem was written as Matat, Jerusalem, in the Amarna letters of Egypt, meaning the lands of Jerusalem. The spelling was Sumerian. The description in the scrolls of the new temple was seemingly given in a vision to an unknown person by an angel. Scholars have speculated that it was given to the teacher of righteousness, who was the Messiah Isa. Prophets were usually given such information by the archangel Gabriel. If we combine the descriptions in the Temple Scroll and the New Jerusalem Scroll with the New Jerusalem described in the Bible's Revelation, we have a perfect image of the sacred mosque in Mecca as it stands today. According to Revelation, this is what it would look like before the end of the world. The angel described 80 portals. Every gate had 2 doors of stone. 2 towers flanked each gate, one on the right and one on the left. Stairs would lead up to the other floors. On the inner side to the right of the towers, on the left side of the entrance, there was a pillar that the stairs spiraled. The scrolls describe a city built like a square block. The 12 gates of the temple, the white stone, the towers, and the stairs that lead to the towers, the atrium within, the houses surrounding the temple are very similar to the sacred mosque of Mecca as it stands today, with its towering minarets that call the faithful to prayer. The Haram al-Sharif, as the sacred mosque is called, is a house of Allah, dedicated to the honor of Adam and created for all mankind. It is also called Al-Bayt al-Haram, the forbidden city, or Al-Bayt al-Atiq, Atiq, the ancient house. Scroll titled The Last Days states that God would command the last messenger of God to build him a temple of Adam, and that in it they sacrificed to him proper sacrifices. No unbeliever would be permitted to enter it forevermore. Strangers shall not again defile it, as they formerly defiled the temple of Israel through their sins. It is in the new land and the new temple that God would establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Ask any Muslim in Mecca, and he will tell you that the throne of Allah rests high above the Kaaba, the Holy of Holies in Mecca. The detailed ornamentation known in Islamic architecture, the highly polished white marble exterior walls, the white marble flooring, the pillars, arches, all of polished stones, are all features of the sacred mosque, all foretold in the scrolls and revelation. The temple scroll describes a third court surrounding a middle court, which surrounds an inner court with an atrium in the middle. There are second and third stories that people can climb up to. The structure shall have columns all around. Only the purified who have performed ablution can enter the precincts, and no menstruating women could do so. In that regard, the rituals of Islam pertaining to ablution and spiritual cleanliness followed in the footsteps of the Israelite traditions as well as those of the Akkadians. Even the form of prayer described in the scrolls is that of the Muslims, that all the congregation of the children of Israel may bow down before me. The temple scroll further describes a land where no foreigners reside, so no laws need to be established for their benefit, since they would be forbidden from living within the new land. The land would be governed by a new set of laws that depart from many of the biblical ones in the past. Michael Wise, Martin Abegg, and Edward Cook, The Dead Sea Scrolls, write about the scroll. The author organized the material by the principle of concentric circles of holiness. These circles begin with the innermost ring surrounding the Holy of Holies in the temple and work outward to embrace the entire land. Thus, the beginning of the scroll describes the architecture for the sanctuary, while by the end we are reading laws governing outlying cities in the land as a whole. The image reflects a circumambulation of pilgrims around the Kaaba, the Holy of Holies. The New Jerusalem would be far larger than any city the Israelites have ever known. Scholars have mistakenly assumed that the New Jerusalem would be in Palestine, and since such a large city and temple could not be built in Palestinian Jerusalem, they imagined that it had to be visionary or heavenly. Now we have an explanation for the Israeli settlers and their illegal settlements, supported by the evangelical Christians. While Muslims have not noticed the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Jews in Israel and their evangelical allies have been greatly influenced by what they have seen in the scrolls. The Jews and Christian evangelicals think if they destroy Al-Aqsa and build their temple in Jerusalem again, the Jewish Messiah will come, or the Christian Jesus will return descending from some clouds of heaven. The rabbinic sages were right. Once you put something in writing, there is a danger that ignorant people will misinterpret it. Since the scrolls say no non-believers will be able to live in that land, the Israelis are confiscating the property of Palestinians in Jerusalem in order to evict them from their lands. They have been doing this since 1967. The scrolls were referring to the Arabian Peninsula, not Palestine. The scroll writers were describing the future in very Israelite terms. They described the new temple's 12 gates as dedicated to the 12 tribes of Israel. Instead, the gates are dedicated to important people in Islamic history: Bab Ibrahim, Bab Ali, Bab Abbas, and so on. Bab means gate. They saw a world in which a high priest still ruled the people, as sacrifices were still performed, and their Messiah or final messenger would be an Israelite. However, the scrolls and prophetic literature confirmed that the normal rituals would be altered to accommodate the Gentiles, and the new covenant would have new rules and restrictions. The Revelation is an odd description of the wars by the second Messiah, or final messenger of God. The scrolls refer to the future messenger as the lion, or the prince of the congregation. The text shows a confusion as to what was expected, but he would wage war with the support of the angels on horseback. He is the Lamb of God, for the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? The Lamb will wage war to avenge the souls of them that were slain for the word of God. The kings of the earth and the great men and the rich men and the mighty men hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. The battles would continue until the beastly nations are defeated and the devil, Satan, is bound for 1,000 years, confirming the Zoroastrian beliefs of a millennium of peace. A description is given of the New Jerusalem in Revelation. The messenger would establish a community with a new name and a new Jerusalem. The followers of the final messenger of God would be dressed in white, as the pilgrims in Mecca are dressed. After this, I beheld, and lo, a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and kindreds and people and tongues, stood before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands, and cried with a loud voice, saying, Salvation to our God, which sitteth upon the throne, and unto the Lamb. For the Lamb which is in the midst of the throne shall feed them, and shall lead them unto living fountains of waters. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. The descriptions of the New Jerusalem in Revelation parallels the scrolls. Revelation says the city lieth foursquare, which matches the wording of the scrolls. It is divided into square blocks like a checkerboard. Within the temple is a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. That is a description of the river that feeds into the well of Zamzam in the sacred sanctuary of Mecca. And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord giveth them light, and they shall reign for ever and ever. The New Jerusalem would extend to 18.67 miles by 13.33 miles and could only be done by God's intervention. The measurements may not be accurate, but it means near the end of the world, the temple would be enlarged substantially to accommodate an increased number of pilgrims. Under the rule of the Saud family, expansions began to be made to the Haram al-Sharif in Mecca. Before 1920, there were 356,000 square miles of indoor and outdoor praying spaces. 4 minarets were added. 18 more gates were built. There are 3 domes corresponding to each gate, an installation of nearly 500 marble columns. Escalators were added, heated floors, AC, and the expansion plans will continue. The capacity increased by 35%. The Kaaba is called the Square House. Marble was quarried from the nearby mountains to use throughout the structure. The additions were made between 1988 to 2005. In the year 692, there was only 1 minaret. The scrolls describe a third court surrounding a middle court, which surrounds an inner court. The atrium is in the middle, but they also describe second and third stories. The third story is the most recent construction. How the sacred mosque in Mecca looked in the 1970s. You can see the number of minarets, the towers, in the scrolls. The temple scroll describes 2 towers flank each gate, one on the right and one on the left. There would be a third court surrounding a middle court, which surrounds an inner court. The structure shall have columns all around. Only the purified who have performed ablution can enter the precincts, and no menstruating women could do so. The structure would be built like a square block, with an atrium within. The scrolls describe the circumambulation of pilgrims, beginning at the center and spreading outward in circles of holiness. The white marble and minaret tower above. White marble pillars within, all described within the scrolls. The Kaaba in the center of the atrium with pilgrims dressed in white bowing down to the throne of Allah that sits above. Here we see 2 stories. Before they replaced the marble flooring, you'll see. The gates with 2 towers, one on each side. These are the Muezzin towers that call the faithful to prayer. The pilgrims inside form concentric circles from the Kaaba outwards, and they continue to encompass all the land. Third story being constructed. Third expansion of Mecca. Grand Mosque receives 19 million worshippers. Look at the size of it. Third expansion of the Grand Mosque in Mecca enabled almost 19 million people to worship there. The expansion had received more than 500,000 worshippers per hour at a rate of 250,000 inside the expansion and more than 250,000 in the squares. 80 new prayer halls that form part of the third phase of expansion open to worshippers for the first time. There is a ground floor, first mezzanine, second floor, second mezzanine. When King Abdulaziz united the country and founded Saudi Arabia, he made the 2 holy mosques a top priority and ensured they received special attention. The entire floor was covered with marble. And when his son King Saud became monarch, the Grand Mosque covered approximately 28,000 square meters. Expansions were made under King Faisal and King Khalid. In 1988, King Fahd laid the foundation stone for the largest expansion of the Grand Mosque in 14 centuries. The project increased its size to 356,000 square meters, enough space for up to 1.5 million worshippers. 2 minarets were added to the existing 7. King Abdullah in 2005 initiated another major expansion project. The total space covered by the Grand Mosque and its open areas and facilities increased to 750,000 square meters. In 2015, King Salman launched 5 major projects designed to allow the mosque to accommodate nearly 2 million worshippers on a 1.5 million square meter site. Pilgrims dress in white, bowing down in prostration to Allah. Now we see the white marble floors. The mataf will also be expanded outward, and all new indoor space will be air-conditioned. Look at it. Look at the pilgrims on the outside, encompassing all the land. Two minarets will be added, bringing the total number to 11. The sacred mosque is lit all day and night. And what does Revelation say? And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it. For the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it. And the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. And there shall in no wise enter it into anything that defileth, neither whatever worth abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and the Lamb. The river feeds the well of Zamzam. And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. As Allah addressed his messenger Muhammad in the Quran, the same religion has he established for you as that which he enjoined on Noah. That which we have sent by inspiration to you, and that which we enjoined on Ibrahim, Musa, and Isa. Namely, that you should remain steadfast in religion and make no divisions therein. To those who worship other things than Allah, hard is the way to which you call them. Allah chooses to himself those whom he pleases, and guides to himself those who turn to him. And they became divided only after knowledge reached them, through selfish envy between themselves. Had it not been for a word that went forth before from thy Lord, tending to a term appointed, the matter would have been settled between them. But truly, those who have inherited the book after them are in suspicious doubt concerning it. The expansion of the sacred mosque in Mecca is one of the many signs that this is the final era before the end of the world. All the signs have now taken place. There is one more within the Quran that no one has noticed, perhaps because it is wrapped in symbolic language. The prophetic literature describes the arrival of the Gog and Magog, Juj and Majuj, who would invade the Islamic world and wreak havoc throughout. Alexander the Great's armies reached the Khyber Pass, where he built the Gate of Gates to hold back the hordes of Gog and Magog. The Muslim armies traveled through the Khyber Pass in 997 in order to spread Islam to India. Revelation describes the events that would happen before the largest expansion of the sacred mosque in Mecca. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out to deceive the nations, which are in the four quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is as the sand of the sea. And they went up on the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints about, and the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The Gog and Magog in both Revelation and the Hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad are said to make up the majority people in the non-Islamic world. Between 997, when the Islamic armies reached Afghanistan, to the present time, 1,000 years have passed. That would take us to the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq by George W. Bush and his evangelical Christian enablers, who made sure he was made president. They would be the armies of the false Messiah. When George W. Bush was governor of Texas in the late 1990s, anyone watching Christian broadcasting stations would have heard one of their guests saying that George W. Bush is one of us, a born-again Christian, unlike his father. We're going to make him president, and then we will invade Iraq with our most advanced weapons, and there will be shock and awe. Everything he said was going to happen actually materialized. The army that gathers together a large coalition of the Gog and Magog to battle is no doubt the coalition of the willing that George W. Bush put together to invade Afghanistan and Iraq. It was made up of 48 countries in April 2003. The Gog and Magog of the Quran, Revelation, and the Ethiopic texts are none other than the European and allied NATO armies that have used the Khyber Pass to invade Afghanistan. George W. Bush's coalition of the willing were the new crusaders, the armies of the false Messiah. The Iraqis were horrified to see the soldiers planting crosses in Iraqi soil as they landed. This is the map, the banner, the flag of George Bush's army. As Revelation said, they would be deceived by the devil. The flag was too large. These were on the left and right of the flag shown in the previous slide. They arrogantly invaded the kingdom of God on earth. The armies of the false Messiah, the Christian fundamentalists, passed the Silk Road Strategy Act, whose intent is to block the growth of Islam in Central Asian nations. Their policies are to reap and plunder the natural resources of the Islamic nations for the benefit of empowering American corporations. 8 major oil companies funded the U.S. Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. Christian fundamentalists, along with their neoconservative allies, have sat on the board of trustees of the U.S. Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce. Fundamentalists have also promoted war against Iran. Their tentacles could be felt all over the Islamic world. Read Jeff Charlotte's The Family. The following was foretold in one of the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad. In the hadith, a Muslim woman named Hazrat Zainab bin Jahsh asked the Prophet about the future of their people. He responded with a warning about the Gog and Magog. Fie upon the Arabs for the evil consequence of which is approaching. A breach has been made in the wall holding back Gog and Magog. That was Afghanistan. When she asked, shall we be destroyed and killed while there are still a number of virtuous persons among us? He responded, yes, when evil and corruption becomes widespread. The Quran states, and when the word is fulfilled against them, the unjust, we shall produce from the earth a beast to face them. He will speak to them, for that mankind did not believe with assurance in our signs. There has been speculation about the word for speak to them, since it could also be translated as a wound them. The word beast is found in biblical literature. I know in Arabic they think the word is bear, a bear, but it's a beast. It is symbolic language for a powerful nation that Allah raises, so as to defeat the unjust nations that have exceeded all bounds. The nation is not God-fearing, but is a weapon of sorts. The word beast is used in Revelation, but is also used 3 times in Ezekiel. It is a reference to a warring people or nation that ravages the earth. A beast is a nation that is ambitious and seeks power at all costs and will defend its territories and claims. If Allah is enabling it to rise to power, then we would see it rising rapidly, economically, and militarily. We would also see signs that it is flexing its muscles, confident in its own rise to power. While historians have noted that the rise and fall of nations is cyclical, there has never been a rational explanation for it. The Quran, however, tells us that Allah is causing the nations to rise and fall. He empowers them to rise, but when they exceed the bounds of justice, He diminishes their power by weakening them. We saw His power when He destroyed all the Israelite-dominated nations at the end of the Bronze Age. When nations like the US, Britain, and other imperialist nations exceed all bounds of justice, waging perpetual wars, Allah punishes them by raising another nation to weaken or defeat them. Once the word is given, the demise of that nation begins to accelerate. And did not Allah check one set of people by means of another, the earth would indeed be full of mischief. When we decide to destroy a population, we send a definite order to those among them who are given the good things of this life and yet transgress, so the word is proved true against them. Then we destroy them utterly. When George W. Bush and his coalition of the willing lit the fires of war within the Islamic world, I warned as early as 2004 that Allah was going to raise China to power, to defeat the US and its allies who participated in the invasion of the Islamic world. My book outlines all the evidence in chapter 15. China is the beast. The US received its warning. There is no nation in history that rose as rapidly and successfully as China. Evangelical Christians have used their false prophecy to justify the invasions of the Islamic world, and that can be seen in all the rhetoric that has emerged from their communities who are in control of the branches of the US government, especially their control of the Republican Party. The Zionist, Jewish, and Christian alliance has strangled the US government. The creation and financial support of the State of Israel by the US government is not only in defiance of the will of God, but has produced nothing but injustice against the Palestinians. While the US-Israeli alliance has done everything in its power to divide the Islamic world and pit Shiites against Sunnis, China has now stepped into the picture to undo the mischief-making of the Zionist Jews, who always try to kindle the fires of war. Regarding the Jews, the Quran says, every time they kindle the fire of war, Allah does extinguish it. But they strive to do mischief on earth, and Allah does not love those who do mischief. A nation that has risen to power by Allah in order to defeat other nations that have exceeded all bounds of justice is also given a warning that it is not free from judgment. As the Quran warns, the worst beasts in the sight of Allah are those who reject Him. They will not believe. Beijing, March 2023. Wang Yi in center, China's top foreign policy official, bringing Shiites and Sunnis together. Ali Shamkhani, right, Secretary of Iran's Security Council. And Mossad bin Mohammed Al-Aban, left, Saudi Arabia's Minister of State. He will speak to them. Again, fulfillment of prophecy. There are many signs given in the hadiths of the Prophet Muhammad that warn of what to expect in the final era before the end of the world. The information was said to have been given by the Archangel Gabriel. Knowledge about religion will be absent. Ignorance about religion will prevail. There will be drinking of alcoholic beverages. There will be a prevalence of blatant sexual promiscuity. Women will be liberated. People who were once destitute herdsmen will be competing with each other in constructing very tall buildings. There will be increased wealth by some of the Muslim nations, and they will be judged by their wealth. Honesty will be lost. Unfit people will have the power of authority. The forces of the Antichrist, the Christian armies that worship the false Messiah, will invade the Islamic world. There will be an increase in wars and killing, with large numbers of innocent civilians being killed. Even the devout among the Muslims will be killed. The Islamic community will be fighting with the Jews. Prior to the Judgment Day, the Quran states that the word or divine decree will be issued as promised against the non-believers. Those who fail to believe in Allah's signs and warnings will be faced with a punishment. Those who question the rights of the Palestinians to defend themselves, the Prophet Muhammad said, Allah does not like the oppressors, but whoso defends himself after being oppressed, such are not to blame. The way of blame is only against those who oppress men and wrongly rebel in the earth. For them there will be a painful torment. Whoever takes a piece of the land of others unjustly, his neck will be encircled with it, and he will sink down the 7 earths on the day of judgment. The priesthood of the Mandaeans, many of whom accompanied the Messiah Isa and the Prophet Yahya to Palestine, wrote their own prophecies for the end of the world. Since both prophets spent time with them in the marshes of Iraq, it is reasonable to assume that they were given some information about the future. The Mandaeans said God protects Islam. They said in the last era before the end of the world, there would be many wars and the Arabs would be in a state of confusion, after which peace will finally be achieved. The world will be under the influence or dominion of a woman, and everyone will follow one religion. That remains to be seen. Finally, the most obvious of the signs that the end of the world is approaching is global warming. The Mandaean priesthood wrote that this era will end when there will be a problem with the air or atmosphere, probably the levels of carbon dioxide, that it will increase the level of greenhouse gases that warm the atmosphere as heat is trapped. They said it will be difficult to breathe. Global warming was foretold in the Quran. The Quran warns that verily the knowledge of the hour is with Allah. To be fair, though, Allah always sends warnings through his prophets. All of mankind is now being warned. Here is a message for mankind. Let them take warning therefrom, and let them know that he is one God. Let men of understanding take heed. We are given several signs. The oceans will boil over with a swell. The oceans will be warming. That has already started. It is well documented by environmentalists that the seas are warming each year. Verily, what is on the earth we shall make but as dust and dry soil. That has also been happening all around the world. The evidence of drought and diminishing of underground water has been alarming. The sky will be rent asunder and it will become red like ointment. That is a sign of severe pollution of the atmosphere. One day the earth will be changed to a different earth, and so will be the heavens, and all will be marshaled forth before Allah, the One, the Irresistible. And you will see the sinners that day bound together in fetters, their garments of liquid pitch and their faces covered with fire. One day we shall remove the mountains, and you will see the earth as a level stretch. The earth shall be shaken to its depths, and the mountains shall be crumbled to atoms, becoming dust scattered abroad. The Prophet Muhammad said, if Allah wants to do good to a person, he makes him comprehend the religion. I am just a distributor, but the grant is from Allah. And remember that this nation, true Muslims, will keep on following Allah's teachings strictly, and they will not be harmed by anyone going on a different path until Allah's order, Day of Judgment, is established. The Quran says, never think that the unbelievers are going to frustrate Allah's plan on earth. Their abode is the fire, and it is indeed an evil refuge.